Hello everyone, this video is the third in a series on the beasts of the book of Revelation of St. John and the wars they will cause. We will try to identify here what the beast of the sea is and the Antichrist who is part of its leaders. That is to say, identify which states or military groups and the men leading them can in today's world embody these agents of Satan, as we have already seen in another video. The beast of the sea is an alliance of nations stemming from the empires described in the prophet Daniel's vision in the Old Testament. The beast of the sea has 7 heads and 10 horns. The heads and horns represent nations, just like the different parts of the beast's body. In Revelation, the beast of the sea appears successively in 2 aspects: a beast that is at once a leopard, lion, and bear. Then, a beast with a scarlet red body. Understanding who these heads, horns, and bodies represent is the puzzle we will attempt to solve. The beast from the sea represents a group of states that will wage war for 3.5 years according to St. John. But it also represents a man, the Antichrist. In the Bible, beasts represent kingdoms or empires, but also the kings who lead these kingdoms. Transposed to our time, the beasts represent states, and the kings are the political or military leaders of these states. In the New Testament, the word Antichrist is a common noun used by the Apostle John in his first letter in chapter 18, to refer to those who deny that Jesus is the Messiah and the Son of God. He also specifies that in fact the expression "the end times" in the Bible refers to the period of human history that begins just after Jesus coming to earth. From that moment, Satan began to raise up antichrists throughout history. This is what the Holy Scripture calls the mystery of iniquity. But the Antichrist, or Antichrist, which is the same thing, also refers to a particular man, the one who is to come during a period of tribulation for humanity, that is to say, a period of trial. These trials are to last 7 years and precede the return of Jesus to earth. Thus, the Apostle St. Paul, in his second letter to the Thessalonians, chapter 2, warns, I quote excerpts, "When it is the end of life, concerning the return of the Lord, the man of sin, the son of perdition, the adversary who opposes all that is called God or worshipped must appear. He even goes so far as to sit as God in the temple of God, proclaiming himself as God." In Revelation, it is one of the heads of the beast that gives the beast world domination. The beast has a mouth that blasphemes and forces the earth to bow before it through its military victories. The image of the beast is then worshipped worldwide by those who bear its mark thanks to the false prophets. Like the Antichrist described by St. Paul, one of the heads of the beast claims to be of divine nature. Or perhaps what's purported to be of divine nature is not the person leading the beast, but a man or thing resembling a man. Maybe an imaginary character, artificial intelligence. Who knows? Whose image the leader of the beast has worshipped. In any case, the head of the coalition of states forming the beast of the sea in the book of Apocalypse is a human being specifically named. It can be said that he is identified with the Antichrist as defined by St. Paul. Except there might be 2 Antichrists, the political or military human leader, and the image he makes worshipped. We will see that the Antichrist is a man leading a nation or a territory symbolized by a horn, that he then rebuilds an empire by conquering 3 other states, also symbolized by 3 horns, in accordance with the vision of the prophet Daniel that we will explain. The beast of the sea is given the power to wage war for 42 months. The whole earth follows the beast. The beast of the sea is the combination of the 4 beasts seen by Daniel in his prophetic vision. The angel Gabriel will give Daniel an explanation about these beasts. One should refer to Daniel 8, that is, chapter 8 of the book of Daniel in the Old Testament, to get the account of this vision. So, Daniel sees a vision of 4 beasts, as well as a throne, a court, open books, and a son of man to whom, I quote, dominion, glory, and a kingdom were given. The subject is actually Jesus Christ, though he is not named, since it's part of the Old Testament. Jesus will refer to himself as the Son of Man in the New Testament. The angel Gabriel warns Daniel, "You must understand that this vision concerns the end times. The four beasts represent four kings who will appear on earth. After them, the people who belong to the Most High God will receive a royal power that they will keep forever and ever. The resurrection of the dead that is to occur in the end times is also mentioned in Daniel 10 with Daniel's third vision. During this vision, the Son of Man, that is Jesus, explicitly describes to him what will happen to his people in the end times. In fact, from Daniel 10 verse 14 and throughout chapter 11, Daniel receives a detailed vision of what will happen to Israel in the end times. The events of the end times mirror the events experienced by Israel during the war led by the Syrian king Antiochus Epiphanes, which we will discuss. The persecutions of Israel at the end times will be led by a king from the north, which means coming from a country north of Jerusalem. This king of the north, who is the figure of the Antichrist for the Jews, will fight fiercely with a king called the king of the south. The biblical narrative refers to the conflict between the Syrian Antiochus Epiphanes and the Egyptian king Ptolemy II. But what interests us especially in decoding the Apocalypse are the four beasts of Daniel's vision, described in chapter 7 of his book. They correspond to the beasts in the book of St. John, and the mention of the end times is explicitly evoked by the angel Gabriel. Therefore, the beasts are not only linked to the history of Israel in antiquity. Through the book of Revelation, we know that the end times will come when the four beasts are united into one single beast. Before the end times, the four beasts, distinct from each other in the book of Daniel, represent the four great empires that dominated the world in general, and Israel in particular. The knowledge of the history of empires and their symbolization by totemic animals makes biblical scholars almost unanimous in identifying these empires. The first beast is a lion with eagle's wings, representing the Babylonian Empire, with its epicenter being the ancient king. The Babylonian Empire extended throughout its history and covered an area roughly corresponding today to the territory of Iraq, Syria, Jordan, Israel, part of Turkey, and part of Saudi Arabia. The first beast stands on its two hind legs like a human being, and it receives human intelligence, says the biblical text. The fact that this beast is likened to a human being must concern us because the Antichrist is a man. The second beast resembles a bear. It represents the empire of the Persians and Medes, which corresponds today to Iran, and a region occupied by the Kurds. The third beast is a leopard with four bird wings on its back and four heads. It is given the power to rule the world. This refers to the four divisions of Alexander the Great's empire, which, upon the Emperor Alexander's death, was divided among his four main generals. The fourth beast has large iron teeth. It is different from the other three beasts, and it has 10 horns. A new, smaller horn starts to grow among the others, and it causes 3 horns to fall. This horn has eyes like those of a human being, and a mouth speaking boastful words. The 10 horns represent 10 kings. They will lead this kingdom one after another. An 11th king, different from the others, will take power and overthrow 3 kings. He will speak against the Most High God, and he will persecute the people belonging to him. This people will be under his power for 3.5 years. Then there will be a judgment in heaven. He will disappear and be destroyed. For this beast as well, one of its members, specifically one of its horns, has human eyes and speaks proudly. Therefore, it represents a human being who can be equated with the Antichrist. Does this horn and this human being represent the same country and the same man as the lion, with eagle's wings of the Babylonian Empire, which also receives human intelligence? Or does this horn designate another country and therefore another possible Antichrist? That's what we will see. In some Bible commentary editions, the fourth beast is equated with the Greek Empire. These 10 horns represent the 10 kings who ruled Syria and Babylonia after Alexander the Great from 323 BC. Antiochus IV. Epiphanes is a Seleucid king from one of the 4 divisions of Alexander the Great's empire. He will cause much suffering to the people of Israel in the 2nd century BC. He will order the abolition of the Torah and desecrate its temple by establishing pagan sacrifices. He represents the 11th horn which overthrows 3 others for the control of Israel. as he defeated 3 rulers of the Laggid Empire of the Ptolemaic dynasty. In fact, Daniel's vision prophesies and somehow overlaps several events in the history of the Jewish people. Antiochus and Epiphanes, the 11th horn, also symbolize the Antichrist, who will lead the empire of the end times. The end times mark the advent of the millennium. Just before, there will be the recognition by Israel of the Messiah they had rejected, Jesus Christ. The book of Daniel announces, after them, that is to say after the 4 empires, the people of the Most High will receive a royal power, which they will keep forever and always. Since Israel did not receive this royal and eternal power after its revolt against Antiochus IV Epiphanes, he could only be a prefiguration of the Antichrist of the end times. This was, moreover, the theological position of the Church Fathers, who studied the prophecies of Daniel and concluded that it could not stop at the historical episode of Antiochus and Epiphanes. But this historical figure of Antiochus gives us the indication that the Antichrist for Israel will come from the same region as him, mainly the Turco-Irako-Syrian area, even if the empire of Antiochus had its historical center rather in Syria. Antiochus IV Epiphanes is also mentioned in Daniel 8 verse 9, where Daniel describes another of his visions. He sees a ram being struck down by a goat, which has a large horn. Then, this large horn breaks and is replaced by 3 other horns. A new horn emerges from the smallest horn of the goat. It conquers territories, persecutes the people of heaven, and even attacks the leader of the inhabitants of heaven, which, according to Daniel, is God. It will stop the sacrifice and offering in the Temple of Jerusalem for 1,150 days, i.e., 2,300 evenings and mornings, as we are told. Then Daniel sees the Son of Man, Jesus, who asks the angel Gabriel to explain the vision he has just received. The angel then reveals to Daniel that the ram is the kingdom of the Persians and Medes, which will be defeated by the Greek empire of Alexander the Great, the goat. Alexander the Great's empire, the great horn, will be shattered at his death and divided among some of his generals, the other horns. In verse 15 of chapter 8, the Son of Man says to Daniel, "This vision concerns the time of the end." Thus, the Bible text also indicates that the horn which overthrows 3 others represents a leader of the end times, not merely a king of antiquity, specifically King Antiochus Epiphanes. Thus, Antiochus Epiphanes, the persecutor of Israel from the Turco-Iraq-Syrian region, appears in 2 of Daniel's visions, that of the goat and that of the 4th beast. However, many interpreters of Revelation and the book of Daniel believe that the 4th beast represents not a part of the Greek Empire, but rather the Roman Empire. It is the Roman Empire that would succeed the Greek Empire in conquering Israel and ultimately bring it down as a nation. The 10 horns then represent the 10 Roman emperors who succeeded each other from the first emperor, Emperor Augustus, to Emperor Vespasian. Vespasian quelled the Jewish revolt just before the destruction of the Jerusalem temple in 70 AD. The Jewish diaspora around the world, and thus the end of the Kingdom of Israel until its restoration in 1948, followed shortly after the failure of this revolt. Indeed, Emperor Vespasian defeated 3 emperors to gain power, symbolized by the 3 uprooted horns. These were Emperors Galba, Otto, and Vitellius. The 11th horn that grows represents his son Titus, who succeeds him in power. It was Titus who would destroy the Jerusalem temple. In fact, the 4th beast in Titus's vision, the one with large iron teeth that will act at the end of times, has a dual identity. It represents the 2 empires that overthrew Israel before the end times, during antiquity, the Greek Empire and the Roman Empire. These 2 empires could have been symbolized by 2 different beasts appearing at different times, since they acted at different points in history. If this is not the case, it may be because, at the end of times, this 4th beast with 2 empires will attack the 2 peoples chosen by God to make a covenant with him, the Israelites first and then the Christians, with 2 poles in the east and the west. The 4th beast, dominated by the Syrian Antiochus Epiphanes, and stemming from the empire of Alexander the Great, will persecute Israel, the people of the covenant in the east, at the end of times. The fourth beast, ruled by the equivalent of a Roman emperor, will devastate the Christian West at the end of times, just as the Roman emperors had previously persecuted the early Christians. The prophecy revealed to Daniel speaks of the highest people, and not specifically the people formed by the Jews. At the end of times, these highest people will be those who recognize Jesus Christ, so the Christians. Then it will include the Jews who will eventually recognize Jesus Christ as their Messiah, according to Christian interpretations of several Bible prophecies. Logically, it is the witnessing peoples of God, the peoples of His covenant, Israel and the Christian nations, who will be persecuted by one or more antichrists at the end of times by the fourth beast. According to the prophet Daniel's vision, we know that the Antichrist will stop the sacrifice and offering for 3.5 years. In Matthew 24, Jesus says that the end will come, when the abomination of desolation, spoken of by the prophet Daniel, is set up in the holy place. Some Christians believe that the apocalypse will only occur after the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem, which they see as the holy place Jesus referred to. Since in Daniel's prophecy, the Antichrist stops the sacrifice and offering for 3.5 years, it seems necessary at first glance that the temple be rebuilt and the sacrifice and offering reinstated so that the Antichrist can forbid them. It is very possible that the Israelis will quickly rebuild a third temple during the troubled times of the Apocalypse Wars. Except that for Christian theology, the holy place is not the temple of Jerusalem, but the body of Christ since the Incarnation. And the body of every Christian is the temple of the Holy Spirit of God. As the Apostle St. Peter says in his first letter, we Christians enter as living stones into the construction of the spiritual dwelling that is Jesus Christ. Why would Jesus return? On the condition that Jews who do not believe in Him, rebuild the temple of Jerusalem by sacrificing red heifers there. It does not really make sense. What would make sense is that the sacrifice and offering mentioned in the Bible also or exclusively pertain to the Christian religion, which is the celebration of the Mass in churches. Sacrifice and offering occur at each Mass, where Jesus Christ's sacrifice for the redemption of our sins is perpetuated, and where the priest symbolically offers to God the body and life, the blood of Christ. Certainly, Daniel must have understood that the sacrifice and offering abolished by the Antichrist at the end of times concerned the worship given at the Temple of Jerusalem. This violation of the temple indeed occurs in history with Antiochus and Epiphanes. But the Temple of Jerusalem is not explicitly named in the divine revelation made to Daniel, which only speaks of a holy place without specifying which one. This revelation was not given to Daniel for him to fully understand it. It was given to him so he could testify and so that it would be understood by the people who must live through the end of times. The sacrifice and offering are therefore probably the sacrifice of the Mass, with its host and cup of wine as an offering. Daniel and the Israelites of the time could not have understood what Christianity and the masses of its church would be. Thus, Daniel understood that the sacrifice was the animal sacrifice as practiced in the Temple of Jerusalem. But the revelation he received may have been veiled and actually applied to Christians or also to Christians. With this interpretation, the sacrifice and the offering of the Mass will be prohibited, and therefore it is certain that churches will be closed by an authoritarian power. This is consistent with the persecution of Christians announced by the opening of the fifth seal in the book of Revelation, and by Jesus himself in Matthew 24. Then you will be handed over to be persecuted and put to death, and you will be hated by all nations because of my name. Ultimately, Daniel's visions depict various historical events, but share the common theme of God's people's persecution, recurring like motifs until the end of time. The 10 horns of the beast represent, at the end of time, 10 states emerging from the vast empire that stretched from the east to the west. This empire gave birth to Greco-Roman civilization and covered territories, some of which later became Muslim. The 10 horns are linked to the description of the scarlet beast. In the book of Revelation, the sea beast is presented in 2 different aspects, and the scarlet beast is one of them. The first aspect is a beast with a leopard's body, a lion's mouth, and bear's feet. The second aspect is that of a scarlet beast, the scarlet color possibly representing warlike violence. St. John specifies that the 10 horns are 10 kings, who have not yet received a kingdom and have been given the authority to rule for 1 hour with the beast. This description suggests a temporary military coalition formed following an initial military conflict. Logically, this would be a first world conflict sparked in the Middle East and in Western countries. The Antichrist who will persecute Israel will come from one of these states. He will defeat 3 leaders of this coalition, perhaps to absorb their state into a larger one. The beast of the sea of the Apocalypse is a combination of some parts of the 4 beasts of Daniel. The nations responsible for the wars of the Apocalypse will therefore be parts of the ancient empires described in Daniel, but they will be smaller and less powerful. For example, the lion in the book of Apocalypse does not have wings, unlike in the book of Daniel. The beast of Apocalypse has the body of a leopard but does not have 4 heads, as in the book of Daniel. The bear in Apocalypse represents only the feet of the beast, whereas Daniel saw the entire body of a bear. However, the beast of the Apocalypse has 7 heads, which indeed are the sum of the heads of the 4 beasts of Daniel. Indeed, the leopard has 4 heads, which adds up to the heads of each of the 3 other beasts. So 4 plus 3 equals 7 heads in total. So the beast of the Apocalypse indeed represents the same alliance of nations as those of Daniel's beasts. The beast of the Apocalypse also indeed has the 10 horns of the last beast. As we have seen, the Antichrist will come from the 10 horns and will create his own kingdom by conquering 3 other kingdoms, or rather, 3 other states in the context of our time. As we have also seen, the Judeo-Christian tradition is a Judeo-Christian tradition, which considers Antiochus Epiphanes as a foreshadowing of the Antichrist, since the book of Daniel prophesies the wars of this king, while placing itself at the horizon of the end times. The Judeo-Christian tradition therefore holds that the Antichrist will come from the same geographical area as Antiochus. In any case, the Antichrist for the people of Israel. Now, the epicenter of Antiochus's empire was Syria, but his kingdom was larger than present-day Syria, and included, notably, part of present-day Turkey. The Seleucid kingdom also began with the annexation of Babylonia, which is modern-day Iraq. In Daniel 10, as we have seen, Jesus warns Daniel that Israel will be persecuted at the end times by a king coming from the north of Israel. All these elements provide us with clues about the geographical origin of the Antichrist of the end times. We can note that part of the current territory of Turkey was thus in the Seleucid kingdom of Antiochus Epiphanes. But Turkey was also partially in the Neo-Babylonian Empire, which was more centered on Iraq. With Iraq, we find the main territory of Daniel's first beast. It is the lion standing on its hind legs like a human being and receiving human intelligence. This human intelligence may be that of the Antichrist of the end times, as it has been supposed. Similarly, in the book of Revelation, the beast has a lion's mouth, and its mouth utters blasphemies. Here again, the lion seems to symbolize a human being and not just a nation. Ultimately, the 3 countries, Iraq, Syria, and Turkey, are good candidates to host the Antichrist. But Turkey was also a key hub for the Eastern and Western Roman empires. And we've seen that the Roman Empire was represented by Daniel's 4th beast, the one from the end times. Turkey is thus better positioned than Iraq and Syria to usher in the Antichrist. This Antichrist will be in the fullness of his power after taking control of 3 other states. He could then be a conqueror coming from Turkey to invade the 3 countries with the most Kurds, Turkey's historical enemies, namely Iraq, Syria, and Iran. Will Israel's persecutor be a global Antichrist, as suggested by the Apocalypse of St. John? According to the book of Daniel, he will attack other countries besides Israel, for he will come to them, sweep through them, and pass, we are told. The resistors to the king of the north are described as holy alliances, and people who know God, which again suggests a context broader than just Israel. But the Son of Man, that is Jesus, tells Daniel, here are those who will escape his grasp: Edom, Moab, and the best of the sons of Ammon. All this territory refers to present-day Jordan, but for many biblical scholars, Edom also symbolizes Europe at the end times. Indeed, Edom is a people mentioned in the book of the prophet Obadiah. In Obadiah's text, God begins by announcing to Edom that he will be punished for his arrogance and for participating in the plundering and aggression of the inhabitants of Judah, a brotherly people. It was during the attack on Judah by the Babylonians. And then, without transition and without explanation, Obadiah's text evokes the day of the Lord and the judgment of all nations, not just Edom. The day of the Lord in the Bible refers to the end of times, meaning the return of Jesus. It already seems strange, this transition from the judgment of Edom to the judgment of all nations. But what's also strange is that Obadiah's text was anachronistic, because at the time of its writing, Edom was a people that had already disappeared. Its disappearance had been mentioned by the prophet Jeremiah in his book. Obadiah makes reference to the prophet Jeremiah by using some of his expressions. In fact, Edom is considered by many biblical scholars to be a symbol of the Christian countries derived from the Roman Empire. This is for two reasons. The first is that in antiquity, the Roman Empire was nicknamed Edom because the legion's tunics, Roman legionaries, were red, and red is Edom in Hebrew. The second and main reason is because of a prophecy made in the book of Genesis in chapter 36. The prophecy is made at the confrontation between Jacob and his brother Esau, later renamed Edom as the people he founded. Without going into detail, some biblical scholars think that Genesis 36 contains a prophecy about the genocide of the Jews during World War II, which God supposedly revealed to Jacob. In the book of Obadiah, Edom, brother of the Jewish Jacob, is punished for all the harm he caused his brother. Essentially, this means that Europe will be punished for the extermination of the Jews in Europe during World War II, and likely also for other persecutions in Jewish history. And it will likely also be punished for all the harm it has caused in the world. But the book of Obadiah is written for the Jews and therefore speaks about the Jews. The book of Abdias is for the Jews and speaks about them. It warns Edom that at the end of times, when Jerusalem is invaded by foreign armies, it should not take advantage and partake in its invasion. In short, at the end of times, if the Christian states ally with the enemy countries of Israel, they will be punished even more severely. This punishment at the end of times will apparently not involve a military occupation by the Antichrist, who will be active in Israel. He will not invade Edom, following the book of Daniel. Nonetheless, Christian Europe will likely have its own Antichrist, as we have seen, created by its own demons and sins. In the book of Abdias, the country of Edom will be looted and betrayed by its allies and governed without wisdom or intelligence. The warriors of Teman, one of the princes of Edom, will be paralyzed and massacred. However, there is no mention of a military occupation after defeat by another army. And it seems there is a question mark over the extent of the suffering that Edom will endure, as if there are things that could be negotiated with God, as if our sufferings could still be alleviated, provided we convert and appeal to the mercy of the Holy Virgin. This is suggested by the interrogative and conditional phrases in the book of Abdias. If thieves came to you, marauders by night, how you would be destroyed? Would they not steal only as much as they could? If grape harvesters came to you, would they leave anything to glean? It's not written in the Old Testament, of course, but Christians know that the prayer of the Rosary has already saved nations from invasion attempts. We would do well to remember that. In any case, the book of Abdias gives the impression that Christians, just like Israelis, will be the first to be judged at the end of times. The peoples of the covenant who have had 2,000 years to know, love and obey Jesus Christ will have to make their choice at the end of times, before their final judgment. A portion of the people of Edom will be deemed worthy of salvation. Apparently, these are the true Christians who will transmit Christianity to the Jews. as they must recognize Jesus Christ as their Messiah at the end of times. In Obadiah it is written, "But there will be a remnant on Mount Zion. It will be holy. The house of Jacob will inherit its inheritance." The covenant people, which is the most important, the holy people, are the Christian people, and the house of Jacob represents the Jews, of course. On the other hand, the rest of the inhabitants of Edom will disappear. No survivors in the house of Esau, says the biblical text. Finally, the United States, which, like all the Christian West, is part of Rome symbolized by Edom, is specifically mentioned in the book of Obadiah. We can read there, "The pride of your heart has deceived you, you who dwell in the crevices of the rock, who inhabit the high country and say in your heart, 'Who will bring me down to the ground?' If you soared like the eagle, if you set your nest among the stars, I will bring you down from there." This reference to an eagle, which unbelievably manages to make its nest among the stars, and that God will bring down, comes a bit out of the blue in the biblical narrative. It rather suggests a hidden message. The eagle and the stars are reminiscent of the United States. The bald eagle is the spirit of the star, a species of eagle symbolizing America. And the stars, of course, bring to mind American flags. So certainly, the Americans did not participate in the genocide of the Jews, but they were part of their plunder, as American banks had agreed in the 1940s to convert into dollars the money stolen from the Jews by the Nazis in exchange for very large commissions. Furthermore, major American companies supported Hitler's rise to power to counter Stalin's communism. Then, Roosevelt maneuvered to favor the war in Europe because it could revive the American economy, which had been struggling since the stock market crash of 1929. It was World War II that made the United States the world's leading economy after 1945. And finally, the United States protected and employed many Nazi scientists after Germany's defeat. But they will surely be punished for all the other wars in the world for which they are responsible. The book of Obadiah thus gives us indications about what the Christian West will endure at the end of time. Returning now to ponder the nationality of the Antichrist. Other prophecies, announced in the books of the prophets Isaiah and Micah, mention an Assyrian enemy who seems to correspond to the Antichrist. Thus, in Micah chapter 5, an Assyrian is mentioned who will attack Israel and be defeated by a Savior come from Bethlehem, obviously Jesus. The power of this Savior will extend to the ends of the earth and bring peace. In Isaiah 31, it is also prophesied that Assyria will fall by a sword not of man. The sword that will destroy it is not a human sword. The divine victor can only be Jesus, whose return will coincide with the elimination of an Assyrian military leader. Now, Assyria also corresponds to the Iraqi-Syrian region for its historic heart. It also covers Turkey and to a lesser extent Iran, which is, however, more comparable to the Persian Empire. The capitals of Assyria were Assur, Kala, and Nineveh, located in present-day Iraq. But apart from Iraq, Turkey is also a good candidate to be the cradle of the Antichrist. Several reasons have already been given for this, but there are still others. Turkey is the country where Pergamum is located. This region mentioned in the book of Revelation, in the letter to the 7 churches. The letter mentions that Pergamum is where the throne of Satan is located. This throne of Satan is most likely the great altar built in the 2nd century BC and dedicated to the cult of Zeus. And Zeus is one of the faces taken by Satan in the pagan world. It is logical that the Antichrist would also sit where Satan does. Additionally, Turkey remains a powerful country today, dreaming of reconstituting the self-christened empire. It could therefore personify the beast of the apocalypse that was dead and returns to life to the amazement of all, as St. John described. Turkish President Erdogan is also currently making very aggressive comments towards Israel. It was Turkey that led the Islamist groups to topple the regime of Bashar al-Assad in Syria. Furthermore, as we've seen, Turkey was an essential part of the Roman Empire when Istanbul was called Byzantium, and Turkey formed a bridge between East and West. Turkey could therefore trigger the reconstitution of the Roman Empire, symbolized by the 4th beast of the book of Daniel and the beast with the body of a leopard from the book of Revelation. Finally, Turkey has strong ties with Germany because of the large immigrant population of Turkish origin in Germany, and also because Berlin hosts the Pergamon Museum. It was in this museum that the Pergamon altar was dismantled, transported, and reassembled in 1886 following an agreement between Germany and the Ottoman Empire. Germany is thus also a country where the throne of Satan is seated. To the extent that the beast of the Antichrist is an alliance of states exercising power worldwide, one might imagine that Germany, in a sort of reconstitution of the Holy Roman Empire, also harbors a face of the Antichrist, but to persecute Christians in Europe. The beast, thought to be dead and coming back to life according to the book of Revelation, might spiritually be the Nazi beast. Hitler indeed resembles a prefiguration of the East. This is all the more credible when we are interested in the transhumanist philosophy exposed by Yuval Noah Harari, a very influential man within the World Economic Forum in Davos, which brings together the richest personalities in the world. Harari speaks of Superman and Homo Deus, man-god, who could emerge thanks to transhumanist technologies. These transhumanist technologies fit quite well with the cult and the mark of the beast described in Revelation. The cult of the Superman was also part of Nazi ideology. Nazism also had a health motivation, as the Nazis justified all the measures of ghettoization and persecution of Jews with a health pretext. They invented that Jews were spreading typhus. We can imagine the advent of a totalitarian regime that would exclude impure men compared to the pure, who accept to bear the mark of the beast. In addition, it can be imagined that Jews were made more useful, hinting that they would have improved health and physical and intellectual performance. The Nazi beast, believed to have disappeared, would then return in a modern variant. The Antichrist would then have two faces, the face of a German man or woman and the face of a Turk. Moreover, the famous German Leopard tanks remind us of the leopard body of the beast of Revelation. The face of the beast is that of a lion, just as the lion is the emblem of the monarchy and the British Empire. Its feet are those of a bear, as the bear is one of the symbols of Russia. So perhaps Germany, the United Kingdom, and Russia will play a particular role in the wars of the apocalypse. Some theories make Russia the seat of the Antichrist based on chapter 38 of the book of Ezekiel. In this chapter, Ezekiel says that the Antichrist will come from the far north, which is, to put it briefly, very north of Israel. Except that in this passage, Ezekiel talks about the battle of Gog and Magog. This battle happens at the end of the world, after the millennium, as explicitly stated in Revelation 20 verse 8. So we're not at the horizon of the end times, but 1,000 years later. Moreover, what rules out a Russian Antichrist from the far is that the Old Testament describes the Antichrist as an enemy of Israel. This enemy will therefore likely come from a Muslim country. Considering the constant historical enmity between Israel and other neighboring nations, which are Muslim today, let's add that the beast of the apocalypse is ridden by a prostitute who symbolizes a large city sitting on 7 mountains, and St. John's vision places it in a desert. Now, Mecca, the cradle of Islam, is the only major city in the world located in a desert and surrounded by 7 mountains. But just because the Bible suggests a Muslim Antichrist does not mean there will be only one Antichrist reigning at the end of times. The text of the Apocalypse clearly shows that the beast's domination is worldwide. All inhabitants of the earth will be tested, either to choose the beast and injustice, or to choose God and His justice. And it seems entirely implausible today that a Muslim leader of a state or military organization could dominate the entire earth. The explanation probably lies in the fact that the Bible records the revelations of the prophets of the people of Israel, the first people to have made a covenant with God. The Bible provides prophecies about all of Israel's future, including during the end times. However, the Bible does not necessarily describe what will happen to the rest of the world. Since the current enemies of Israel are of Muslim faith, it is logical that the Bible describes an Antichrist coming from one of these countries hostile to Israel. But it is likely that each country or region of the world will raise its own beast, its own Antichrist. It will be spawned by the sins of its inhabitants and will grow into a monster proportional to their sins, particularly to the extent of their submission to the great prostitute. In the Apocalypse, the beast is indeed subjected to the great prostitute, the mother of the abominations of the earth, before ultimately turning against her. The prostitute symbolizes the power of corruption, the corruption that leads men to do evil on earth to obtain power and money from the prostitute. Hence the dependency of the earth's kings and merchants on the prostitute described by John. But beyond its spiritual meaning, the prostitute has an identity that we will try to decipher in the next video of this series. Thank you for listening to me. Feel free to like, share this information, and maybe even join us in the real world. Have a great day, and God bless you.